everybody. My name's Alan. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Bridging Heaven and Earth. You know, this show was shot in March of 2001, and from what went on this week, it could have been shot anytime, anywhere over the last number of years. In this week alone, or in this 2-week period since we shot our last show live, there have been 2 shootings in schools where people have been killed. There's been in Santa Barbara a situation where a guy got in his car and just ran into a bunch of partying people on a Friday night. Now, what happens? What do we do in a world where that becomes happening more and more and more and more? How do we bully? How do we treat people? How do we put ourselves above each other? How do we separate ourselves and get so much anger in people so young? How does that happen in a human life, in a country that was based and founded on God, on truth, on that connection to that oneness between us all? How do we get to that point where the anger is so great in us and the separation is so strong that we pick up a gun, that we get in a car and floor it into, theoretically, our friends? And so for each of us, how in our lives do we separate ourselves out? Do we put ourselves above each other? Is it because we're a better religion, a clearer religion, a better race? Do we in our heads think about the niggers and the kikes and the Jews and the gooks? Is that the way we do it? Is it because of a sexual preference? What way do we put ourselves above each other? What way do we create a world where that anger is so strong in us? When in fact, the truth is we are all brothers and sisters. The truth is that we are all that same love. Is that we can have the experience as human beings, that there is a connection, that we are all that same connection, that we are all that same love, and that there is no separation ever between us. And how can we not dedicate ourselves to that again and again and again? And as you know, I mean, that's what the Bridging Heaven and Earth show is about, is to have that experience, to share that experience, to put out that vibration of love so strong that those walls of separation just lose their strength. They're so stupid in light of our true connection. And really, that's what's happening. And again, as we do on this show, because those are the kind of people who we're drawn to or drawn to the show, we have people whose lives are dedicated to spreading that love, to spreading that understanding and that experience of that connection. We have with us tonight Thom Hartmann, who's all the way in from the East Coast. You know, we film in Santa Barbara. He's a spiritual teacher. He's a psychotherapist. He's an internationally known speaker who travels the world with that message of how we can come in contact and live in contact with that oneness, with that truth. He's the author of 9 books. He's been dealing with children. He has an incredible book out, Healing ADD, which we know is an extraordinary problem here in what we define it as and how we treat it. I mean, just the whole thing of it, which leads to that anger, which leads to that craziness. And he's written other books, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, which is a book that describes the personal and global transformation that's possible, that is happening now. And he's written another book, The Greatest Spiritual Secrets of the Century. And of course, we'll ask him about that because we all want to know it. What is the greatest spiritual secret of the century? And I'm sure when he talks about it, we'll know that that's the truth. And we'll know that that's what our lives are dedicated to, or they should be, because what's the point otherwise? What's the point of all the separation and all the anger and all the hate? It just is so stupid in light of the love. So we also have with us, as we normally do, a musical guest who brings that vibration of love in with her music and her words. Anne-Marie Bush is with us. She's an amazing singer-songwriter. She's a performing and recording artist. And she's here from her homeland of Denmark, where she's tremendously active in the music scene there. And we're just so delighted that she's living in Santa Barbara now and able to share her love with us in her way. So again, we have an experience and a time where that love can for the next 58 minutes transform us and bring us closer into that experience. And don't you think it's time that we did that? Don't you think it's time that we all knew that one love and that truth that we call God or whatever we call it? But it's time for us now. So please, as we normally do, join me in a short meditation. Then we're going to have Thom and Anne-Marie. And it's a chance for us all to have that experience more and more and more. So please join me. Hi, thank you. So the availability really is here now for us to do this. So for whatever reason that we don't do it and whatever goes on in our lives that prevents us from having that experience, it's time for us to have that experience. So we're going to start a little bit with Anne-Marie's song. She's going to do Someday, which is written by Anne-Marie and Steve Singer, and it's going to be performed by Anne-Marie. So it's an opportunity for us. Again, let me be clear that this is an opportunity for us to really know that love. And just listen to the words of this song. Listen to the someday that we want to have. Listen to the experience that Anne-Marie is bringing and the love that she is bringing to this song. So whenever we're ready, Someday, performed by Anne-Marie.
Thank you so much. The first song I'm going to sing is called Someday. Yeah, got that right. Wanted to something. When your heart is cold and lonely, and it takes you to the ground. When it's dark and your soul doesn't see, hold on, 'cause there's so much more to achieve. Someday, somewhere, all you gotta
Hi, thank you, Anne-Marie. That's wonderful. So we're on the set with Thom. So what's the greatest spiritual secret of the century? Why don't you tell us that right off?
Oh my. Well, I have a little ambivalence about telling you right off because the book is a novel, and so in the very beginning of the story, the character of the story is confronted with a series of extraordinary events, and one of them being the opportunity to find out what is the greatest spiritual secret of the century. And the character who's talking with him, his kind of mentor figure, says essentially, if I just told you, it just sounds like a few words. You know, you have to have a certain number of understandings in order to really understand the context of this. But my assumption is that most of your audience, at least,
I would say
sufficiently advanced to get that. So where he finally ends up is with the notion that not only we are all one, but it is all one.
Right. There is one, and you're it.
Yeah,
it's very cool.
Yeah, and it's a fun story. It's kind of a pretentious title. It's the first book from Neale Walsch's new line of books, who wrote Conversations with God, his imprint.
Speaking of pretentious titles, so you were following in a line of. Yeah. The whole series is going to be good books with pretentious titles. Right?
Well, he's done well. He's got some very good authors who are writing for this.
Great,
and he wanted to.
The books are very powerful, and it's changed a lot of lives, and they've really had a tremendous impact.
And he wanted to carry on with the Ogmandino series. You know, we had this conversation a year or so ago out in Hawaii, and he said, you know, Ogmandino's dead, and he wrote Greatest Story Ever Told and Greatest Salesman there. He says, you know, I want to publish a book. He says, I want to publish a book called The Greatest Spiritual Secret of the Century. And I said, that's a great idea. And he said,
I'm your man.
Yeah. He said, who could walk by that and not pick it, at least pick it up? And I said, yeah. And he said, you want to write it? And I said, sure. And I said, by the way, what's the greatest spiritual secret of the century? He says, you're writing the book. But we had a consensus, I think, about what it was before we even began the conversation.
I think that's what all the spiritual masters came to say.
Yeah.
And we're saying it over and over again now.
In so many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the failure to understand that is what seems to be bringing us all these crises and all these different levels. In the one of my books you have here, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, about the environmental meltdown, you know, and the ecological disasters we're facing, and the fact that there's, you know, maybe 30 years of oil left, which is ancient sunlight. And, you know, what are we going to do about that, you know, and what kind of issues that's bringing up. And then the books that I've written on attention deficit disorder, where, again, we're you know, with this little phrase, we're taking the responsibility for education off the shoulders of people who are adults, who have credentials, who went to college, who theoretically know about education, and dropping it onto the shoulders of a 7-year-old and then saying, the blame is there, you know, with that child. And if there was just
a little slightly misplaced, you would have to say, logically speaking. Huh?
I would agree emphatically. Yeah. And I think if there was more of that notion that we're all one, you know, that in the case of ADHD in our schools, that our kids are part of us, that you know, they're not just our future. They're not just the people who in our old age are going to, you know, write the Social Security checks or keep the streets clean or whatever. They
check
are
us into the homes.
God forbid.
Put your teeth in, Dad, will you? Right. Drooling all over you. No.
We're closer than we realize.
I just had my birthday, and it was a shocking number. That's all I could say.
Yeah. Mine's coming up in a short while here. And the same thing with the environment. This disconnect that is so pervasive that you know, we can really trace back 6,000 years to the beginning of you know, the Mesopotamian Sumerian culture, what we call modern Western civilization. The idea that people are different from everything else, that there's humans and there's everything else in the world. And
even in humans, like I was saying at the opening, we divide that up pretty good too.
Oh, yeah.
We certainly go after that.
Yeah, and within our religions, I mean, what we're doing is we're in our organizations, in our educational systems, in our workplace, and in our religious institutions, we're reinventing our worldview, which is this really a perversion or a twisting of Darwin's notion. I mean, this very much is not what Darwin said. But the contemporary belief is that it is this notion that whoever is the strongest and most competitive deserves to have the most resources and be on the top and have all the wealth or all the power or however you want to define it. And then it trickles down to those that are progressively poorer and poorer and poorer until we have the fact that you've got half the world's population, 3 billion people living on less than $2 a day. And that's just fine, in this worldview. And when in
you
fact,
wonder why people get angry so much.
Yeah. No, and we're facing some really serious problems. We're facing some very serious problems, in fact. And I think that they all come from the failure to get, and it's not just understand.
No, to experience,
to know,
absolutely.
In your heart and your bones,
right.
To know that we're all one, that we're all part of one thing, that the bridge between heaven and earth is real. That in fact there isn't even a bridge because it's all one.
Right. Yeah, I know. We just use all these
metaphor.
words. Right.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. And so we look at some of the situations that we're facing in the world today. That in the 24 hours since this time yesterday, over 50,000 people have died of starvation. Over 100 species have gone extinct. Over 13 million tons of toxic waste have been dumped into the air and water and soil. 200,000 acres of rainforest have gone. What's happening? What's causing this? And when we look one level deeper, we discover that the problem isn't so much our human behavior, although that's driving it, but it's the way that we think. Because the way that we think.
And behind that is the way we experience it. We don't feel that the trees or the dolphins or each other are, as we started out,
Absolutely
are
right.
ourselves.
Absolutely right. And where that's grounded is in our stories. A culture is essentially a collection of stories that we all agree to tell ourselves and pretend are true. And so we have in our culture a set of dysfunctional stories that other cultures, mostly...
You mean like the American culture, the Western European culture, or the whole world view at this point?
I'd say at this level of culture, about probably 90% of all people on Earth are members of one culture, which is the culture that views humans as separate, the world as something to be used, uses technology, uses written language, and then there are
use.
Yeah, and then there are the indigenous people out there, and our stories about who we are and where we fit in and how it all works are very different from their stories. And in education, for example, we touched on that, some of those stories, and that's my books on ADD are really about the stories that we tell ourselves about what it means to be functional in a dysfunctional educational system. Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, Prophet's Way, Greatest Secret, those books are more about the real core stories. For example, we know that population is running amok, okay? The world's population, human population, grew from a few 100 million, 200,000 years ago to the first 1 billion in 1800. So it took all of human history, basically, millions of years, to reach 1 billion people in 1800. The second billion only took 130 years, 1930. The third billion only took 30 years, 1960. The fourth billion only took 14 years, 1974. The fifth billion only took 13 years, 1987. And the sixth billion only took 12 years. So there's this exponential explosion. Well, the story we tell ourselves is that this is the human nature. It's the fault of humans, and that this is a predictable problem and all this sort of thing. Yet there are cultures all around the world that for 10,000 years have not had this population explosion. These populations have been stable. What's the difference? Well, when we look at just this one issue of population, for example, we find that among the technological salvationists in our culture, those people who believe that technology will save us, they say, well, it's a lack of birth control. Well, it's true. It's a terrible problem. There are 700 million people in the world without access to birth control technology. It's a terrible problem. But 700 million people don't produce 6 billion people in 100 years. It's just, So that's not the problem. It's a problem. Then the economic salvationists, basically the kind of GATT, NAFTA, Republican, who say, oh, everything would be wonderful if everybody in the world just had the standard of living of middle-class America, because then we have zero population growth in middle-class America.
And McDonald's everywhere.
Right. If that would happen.
Toxic food every quarter. That would dream come true for us all.
Right. Well, the problem with that is that, first of all, if all 6 billion of us on Earth lived the lifestyle of an Appalachian family of four at $14,000 a year, the bottom of,
the American culture.
Right. it would require
out of oil.
It would
That's like 20 minutes ago.
It would require 4 planet Earths to provide the raw materials. So it's simply not possible. It's just
so we can
absolutely not
clone
possible.
sheep, but we haven't learned how to clone planet.
Right. And secondly, if we were, well, it's just simply not possible. So it's not, the economic salvationist notion and the technological salvationist notion doesn't work. So the question becomes then, what is it? What is driving population if it's not these things?
Well, we know what causes it.
Well, I'll tell you, it's very simple. It's a story. And the story is that, and the story is we play it out in this culture, and did up until relatively recently, and now it's breaking down and fewer people are believing it at the level of behavior, but the story is that God created the world, God's angry with us, and it's all a woman's fault. Basically what happens is that in those cultures where women have relatively equal power with men, even though we haven't fully reached that in our culture, once a certain threshold is passed, population stabilizes in 1 generation. Regardless of access to technology, whether it's the Dani people living 120 feet above the ground in the rainforest trees in Indonesia, regardless of wealth, whether it's the Icelandic people in a matrilineal, matriarchal society 200 years ago in that island nation, regardless of access to either of those things, when women have equal power with men, population stabilizes, and when women are bought and sold like cattle, population explodes. And again, there are countries that have higher per capita incomes than the United States, some of the oil-rich nations of the Middle East and the Far East, where women have absolutely no rights, and the average family is 7, 8, 10, 12, 14 people. And there are certainly places in the world where they have full access to birth control and population spinning out of control. So it all boils down to the level of story. So we find that the story about the role of women in society is a story which can either save us or destroy us. In that way, you could say the women's rights movement worldwide is one of the most powerful of the human rights movements. So in the last hours of Ancient Sunlight, and to some extent in this little piece I did for Imagine, Marianne Williamson's new book, one of the things that I was trying to do was point out the stories in our culture that are toxic. There's, in my opinion, 7 clearly identifiable ones. That's one of them. And what alternatives there might be to those stories. The Greatest Spiritual Secret is really just about, well, it's really about at least more than one. It touches on all of them in some ways, but the main one is the story of disconnection. The story of the world is a machine, it's dead, the other humans are things out there, and we're something in here, and that. All the pieces of the story that are the opposite of the story of oneness. In Imagine, the chapter I did is on community, and so it's about the story that we're not connected to each other.
Yeah, common unity, but who remembers that word, that part of it? Yeah. So, do you find that message is resonating with people, or it's resonating with people who are open to it? They're not inviting you to Saudi Arabia to talk.
No, but I'm going to Singapore in a couple of weeks. I'm going to London a week after next, and then Singapore after that. And it'll be a long time before I get invited, I think, to Saudi Arabia. But it's surprising, though, the venues that are open to these kinds of messages.
What's behind all these discordant stories? They came from a discordant experience. Mm-hmm. So, would you say that there's a root discordant experience that leads to all these berserko?
Yes. That was the question that I was trying to answer when I wrote Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight. I had been reading all these books on ecology and getting it that we have a mess. The statistics that I cited before, and it gets worse than that even. And all the books that I was reading were saying things like, here's the problem, here's a solution. Here's the problem, too many people, birth control.
A balloon, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right. So it just pop up somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. Too many people, economic growth, whatever. And I thought, well, first of all, it's kind of a very American approach, it's a very Western approach. But secondly, what occurred to me was that nobody was asking what I thought was the real question, which is not what's the solution to the problem, but rather what's the cause of the problem.
Right, what's the source?
It's what's really driving it.
Right.
And as part of the work that I had been doing for years, actually, I wrote a book called The Prophet's Way about this. For the last 20 almost 25 years, I've been doing international relief work with an organization based in Germany, Kindred Hilsvik Solomon. We started a hospital in Uganda during the war with Idi Amin, and a program for slum children in the La Paz slums of Bogota. And I've spent a lot of time in the third world, an enormous amount of time in the third world, and a lot of time with indigenous people around the world. And one of the things that I keep finding is that their stories are different than ours. Just a real simple example. This is one of these are the little things that, just in my head. I was doing a education training in Lockhart River, at the Lockhart River School District, way up in North Queensland in Australia. And it's an entirely Aboriginal school in terms of the students and an all-white staff. And they're trying to do traditional European, everybody.
And the modern age example of missionaries.
Well, it's an extension of that.
Yeah, exactly.
It really is. Yeah,
that worked really well.
Yeah.
It was really good. That was a real productive period for the indigenous people in the Indies.
Well, what's interesting is that even today, for a long, long time this has been going on, but even today the teachers are just baffled and amazed by the fact that the kids, when they would teach them what we would consider competitive games, soccer, football, things like that. Well, they would play until both teams had the same score.
Oh, really?
And that's when they figured the game was over.
Really?
It's like,
really?
Well,
just instinctively, they knew that they were all just having fun.
Yeah. And the
Which is
balance had to be
us, where, in Little League fathers getting fights with the coaches.
Oh, yeah.
All that anger and all that craziness.
Yeah. So it all goes back to our stories. And where the stories first got broken, in my opinion, was with Gilgamesh or Gilgamesh, depending on whose pronunciation you're going with. And the father, as it were, of Sumerian culture, the father of Western civilization, and the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story that the oldest written story, 5,000 to 6,000 years old, that tells the story of how this one guy decided that he was going to defy the forest god Humbuba, cut his head off, and thus plunder the cedars of Lebanon and use that wood to build a mighty city, Uruk, which is Uruk and Ur are the cities where Adam and Eve sent their third son to find a wife. So this is a culture that precedes the biblical creation story. And Gilgamesh had this strange idea that he could rise higher than the gods, and he did successfully for several hundred years, and then.
He was a legend in his own mind.
Yeah, well, and then
while there,
and then Enlil, who was the god of gods in that pantheon, who reappears in my book, The Greatest Spiritual Secret of the Century. I just couldn't resist bringing him in. Enlil says, "Okay, enough of this,"
and the darkest.
Right, and he wipes them out. And they have a story of kind of a Noah's Ark story that's identical to the Noah's Ark story. But beyond that, the destruction of Ur and Uruk is well known archaeologically, and not just anthropologically, not just by story, but you can find it. And they had diverted the Euphrates, and they cut down all the forests, and so downwind they created desert because the trees weren't evaporating moisture, and they were growing nothing but barley, the same crop over and over and over again. So they wiped out their soil. They killed themselves off by destroying their ecosystem. It's the first and oldest example of humans making the mistake.
We're quite a bunch, aren't we?
Yeah.
And we make it over and over again. That's the great thing.
Yeah. We have.
All right, so maybe what we'll do now is have Anne-Marie's second set, and then we'll come back and get more into it and get more into the root of it with Thom. So the second set, Anne-Marie's going to do Wings to Fly, and it's written by Anne-Marie and Ray Card, and it's going to be performed by Anne-Marie. And the second song she's going to do is I Will Surrender, written by Anne-Marie and Brian Mann, and it's going to be performed by Anne-Marie. So it's Wings to Fly and I Will Surrender.
Thank you. Both songs I wrote a while ago because I believe we all have this need within, from the depth of our soul, of giving in, of surrendering. Wings to Fly and I Will Surrender.
Survive when I was weak. You make me strong, told me to hold on. You're my special friend, my newborn soul. You're guiding me the way home. The days without an end, no more nights on my own. I'm feeling all alone. Out of the dark, you are the guide to make me see the light within me, to reach my heart and show me how to break free. Oh, it's so fantasy, yeah, yeah. Every breath that I take, each move that I make, you're giving me wings to fly. In my heart I believe you'll be all that I need. You're giving me wings to fly. When there's nowhere to go and the road seems unclear, I just call you be here. Through the storm and the break, I know you always ease me there. There's no need to fear, no. Out of the dark, you are the guide to make me see the light within me, to reach my heart, show me how to break free. Oh, it's so clear to see, yeah, yeah. Every breath that I take, each move that I make, you're giving me wings to fly. In my heart I believe you'll be all that I need. You're giving me wings to fly. Every breath that I take, each move that I make, you're giving me wings to fly. In my heart I believe you'll be all that I need. You're giving me wings to fly. I'll ride the wind on wings of love. You take me far, far above, yeah. 'Cause you will be my heavenly guide. My heart I believe you'll be all that I need. You're giving me wings to fly. That's it. It's smooth and make. You're giving me wings to fly. I believe you'll be all, baby, to fly. It's smooth and make. You're giving me wings to fly. Miles left behind, peace in my mind. Have I found what I'm looking for? Love came my way, but I pushed it away. I was hungry for something more, like leaves in the wind, birds in the sky. I will reach out and fly. I will surrender. should fall, I'll give you my all. Every storm will give wings to grow like stars in the night. I'll be the guide, your candid soul to take you home. I will surrender to you. Not that I'm weak, not that I'm strong, but even my heart and all I will go on, 'cause I will surrender River deep, take me to the ocean. Let me keep the secrets from the there. 'Cause I know our house will stay together. Well, I will flow eternally forever. River deep, take me to the ocean. Let me keep the secrets from the there. 'Cause I know our house will stay together. I will surrender to you. Not that I'm weak, not that I'm strong, but even my heart and all I will go on, 'cause I will surrender. I will surrender to you. Not that I'm weak, not that I'm strong, even my heart and all I will go on, 'cause I will surrender to River deep, take me to the ocean. Let me keep the secrets from the there. 'Cause I know our house will stay together. Well, I will flow eternally forever. River deep, take me to the ocean. Let me keep the secrets from the there. 'Cause I know our house will stay together.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you, Anne-Marie. So we're back on the set with Thom. So how is it that we believe all these, I mean, if you think about it, each one of these stories is so kind of idiotic, really, on the face of it. All this, women are less, colors are less, religion, I mean, just all the...
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges, it's interesting, you read the biography of Jonathan Brainerd, who was one of the late 18th century missionaries, early 19th century missionaries in the United States, missionaries to the Indians, and he used to write back about his frustration. He said, that these ignorant savages couldn't be convinced that they were sinners, that they were born with God hating them and angry at them.
Isn't that beautiful?
And he was just like,
really
how can I convince them of this,
I mean, it's not much different now.
I know.
I mean, that's the,
Actually, the tragic thing is there's an organization called New Tribes Mission that sends out a magazine and has a website, and their number one mission is to convert every last indigenous group in the world to Christianity. And then there's
then they'll work on the Jews.
Well, and there's Islamic analogs as well.
Their way up.
Yeah. I think they started on the Jews a long time ago. Well, they started on the indigenous people a long time ago too. This is the story of an evangelical culture, and the
it's interesting to me because I mean, like we were just talking, earlier. I mean, we've done 115 shows. We had over 200 and some, I guess. That it's amazing to me that we can still believe all that stuff. I mean, after all the teachers and all the masters who came, and you get Jesus who came, and in Jesus' name, all the holy wars. I mean, love thy brother as thyself. I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
He didn't say love your Christian brother, love your black brother, love your white brother, love your gay brother. You know, he didn't break it down.
Yeah.
And yet in that name, and in the name of, you know, over in the Middle East now, in the name of, you know, the Koran or, you know.
Muhammad and
it's just, isn't it, I mean, it's shocking to me week after week to see this stuff.
It's certainly sad, saddening. When you take it all the way back, what you find is that somebody locked up the food. I mean, that's where it started. That's the kind of the bottom line. One of the most articulate spokespeople for this is Dan Quinn. He writes about this with some passion. And Marianne, who wrote The Chalice and the Blade. I mean, there's no shortage of people talking about this and doing a very good job of it. But with Gilgamesh, that original idea that there should be somebody who is in charge and other people who aren't was the beginning of slaveholding. And most indigenous people, most indigenous cultures are not slaveholding cultures. In fact, it's an alien notion to them. In fact, what we would call a tribal chief or chieftain is the person who carries the greatest burden, who has the greatest responsibility, and who's usually one of the poorest in the community. And so, you know, somewhere along the line, somebody said, well, if I lock up the food and stand here with a weapon and tell people that they've got to do what I say in order to get it, then I can reinvent society. And it appears that happened first in places where food supplies were cyclical. It's interesting, among the North American natives, there were a couple of tribes near Vancouver Island who were slaveholders when they were first encountered by the Europeans. About 15% of their populations were slaves. And none of the Native American tribes around them were. The question was, what was the difference? Well, these two tribes lived off the salmon and other fish that ran 2 to 4 times a year through the rivers in that area. And so they had these...
Those with storage.
Exactly. They had periodic explosions of food, and somebody along the way said, hey, there's this whole room full of food. If I put a lock on the door and tell people they got to do what I say, I can be in charge. And I remember when I first read that, it was some years ago when I was doing this research for Last Hours, and I remember when I was a little kid, I was raised Methodist, and I remember being in church one day and hearing the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus said, and don't store up food into barns. And I'm going, what? You know, what does that have to do with anything? You don't store up food into barns, you starve. You know, why would he say something dumb like that? And boom, that was the beginning. You know, that was the beginning. Don't store up food into barns is one of the most important values of hunting-gathering people. It's an anti-slavery value, it's an anti-kingdom value, and it's an anti-hierarchical.
And just separation.
Yeah. It's a we are all one value, oddly enough. And so our stories got changed, and they got changed for what sociologically, or dispassionately, if we separate morality from it, it seems like at one time anyway, was a very useful idea or a useful reason. If you wanted to create a culture that would produce as much human flesh as possible, as rapidly as possible, we have successfully done that. You know, in 1987, we outnumbered rats as the most numerous mammalian species on Earth. In 1995, we outnumbered termites as the largest.
Is that so? Really?
Yeah, the largest single species mass of.
I thought there were more rats in New York than all the people and all the termites.
No, there's 6 billion humans on Earth.
There we go again. Another thing busted.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, really, when you think about, what is 6 billion people? And then what's racing through them, those 6 billion people. I was in India last year, and 1/3 of the country, over 340 million people, are infected with tuberculosis. It's the fastest spreading, most deadly disease in the world now. Over 1 billion people have tuberculosis. That's 4 times the number of people who were alive when Jesus was around. It's the population of the world, the entire world in 1800. And so, so
you think a radical shift is really needed? I mean, we can't, we don't have time to...
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you could, maybe we have like 10 or 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
If you could, outline, for over the years, the millions of people are going to watch it sooner or later.
What are the shifts?
What are the shifts?
Yeah.
What would you suggest? Go get them.
Yeah. we have to change our stories. And what you find, first of all, to go from the macro to the micro, what you find, first of all, is that true changing of institutional and cultural stories never happens from the top down.
Comes from within.
It always
out.
comes from the
Right.
bottom up.
Right.
You know,
And from within out.
Rosa Parks was one woman sitting on a bus. You know, Martin Luther King had 3 friends when he started out. Gandhi had 4 guys with him when he started out. Jesus had, 1 or 2, and it built up to 12. I mean, it always starts from the bottom up, and it always starts with a small number of people. So the question
The results
is,
of all these people were a little bit.
yeah, well,
They didn't end up well. Rosa
Well,
Parks made the only one who
yeah,
made it to all
Rosa,
those.
yeah.
I know.
Nonetheless,
It's when you take on, when you take on the world.
Susan B.
it's-
Anthony, in the 1920s with women's suffrage. I mean, it always starts from the bottom up. So if we are going to see change, we have to, the responsibility is yours and mine, and the people who are watching and listening today. And don't ever underestimate the power of one person to make change. To wake
Well,
up.
1 and 1 is 11, and 1 and 1 and 1. I mean
Right.
it's exponential.
Right. They came to Buddha and they said, are you a god? And he said no. And they said, are you an angel? And he said no. And they said, are you a saint? And he said no. And they said, well, what are you? And he said, I'm awake. And that's what we have to do, is awaken people. So, and that's what this is about. When you point out to people that their stories are sick and toxic and broken and may have been useful at one time to produce 6 billion people, but they're not useful anymore because we really don't need 6 billion people or 7 billion. Or 8 billion.
Enough is enough.
Yeah, right.
We've done that.
Right. When you point out to people that their stories are sick and broken, they wake up really fast. I mean, I remember when I was a kid in the 50s watching on television, during the Eisenhower-Nixon administration, the fire hoses spraying on those guys down there in the South. I remember, it's in the 1920s when Susan B. Anthony and the others were marching.
You don't remember that.
I don't remember that. No.
Which birthday you coming up to? You look really good.
But what happened was the story got out there. When Abraham Lincoln, it's definitely not one of my birthdays. When Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, he said, who wrote, Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a novel that made real for whites in America the horrors of black slavery. When he met her, he said, "Oh, so you're the little lady who started this war." I mean, it's like when we are confronted with toxic stories being acted out, they break down really, really rapidly.
You're saying that any way the light can be shown on the darkness.
Right. So then we have to define what the stories are that are toxic. The first one we've already talked about, that women should be the property of men, basically, as a toxic story. And the healthy alternative is that women and men are all humans and we're all in this together. Okay. Another toxic.
A novel approach.
Yes. Well, actually, it is for most of the world.
I mean, it's so pathetically stupid to think otherwise, and yet
there are fewer than 1 billion people on the planet Earth right now who live in a culture where women have anything even remotely close
out of 6
to equal power. Out of 6, yeah, to equal power with men. That's 1/6 of the world's population, and arguably even half of that. I mean, it's really only about 500 million.
The United States, I don't know what you're thinking exactly.
Yeah, it's basically the U.S., Western Europe, and Canada, and that's about it. Another toxic story. The story that we're separate from nature and that we aren't subject to the laws of nature. That we can do whatever we want, and if we screw it up, we'll fix it. It's all just a machine. If we just pull the right levers, we'll get it right someday, somehow. And you'd think we would have learned by now, with DDT and everything. You'd think we would have learned, but no, we're doing all this stuff, and so breaking down that story is, another important one. Another important one, I think, this is one of my favorite. We won't have time for all of them, but which is just as well because then people will read books and things.
Right.
But one of the most important ones is the idea that balance and harmony are the way that society should be structured instead of sin and punishment. In our culture, when people act out things, we have a creation story which is unique among tribal people. Most tribal people's creation stories have people being born or created or dropped as an egg out of the sky or whatever, all these different ways, as being as fully perfect as everything else and perfectly in balance with everything else. And when people get out of balance, when things go wrong, it's because somebody got out of balance. And the purpose of the community is to bring them back into balance. I remember one time, a number of years ago, I was sitting around with a group of Apache men, and we had one of them was a friend of mine, and I had been there for puberty ceremony for his daughter and all this stuff. And anyway, we had done this long sweat, and we were out in the desert in the middle of the night, sitting around cooling off, and about 6 guys sitting around in a circle just doing guy talk, right? And they're making fun, making jokes about the Hopi who live up the road, you know, who've been traditional antagonists with both of the Navajo and the Apache. And I didn't know any Hopi to make any jokes about at the time, and so I did what, you know, kind of sitcom America does. You know, you turn on the TV and you see this within 5 minutes. I made a joke about a guy around the circle, you know, the guy sitting opposite me around the fire. You know, kind of a put-down joke. Immediately there was just this stunned silence. And I thought, oh no, yeah, what did I do?
There I did, white man make bad mistake.
Right.
You're going to send me over to Hopi's naked. This is going to be a long walk tonight.
Yeah. And after, 2 or 3, worried minutes, finally the oldest man in the group, who was just sitting to my left, kind of stirs himself and he says, you know, I remember when I was young and stupid and I said something that really embarrassed and humiliated a friend of mine right in front of him and all of our friends. And then he goes on to tell the story of what he did to make it right. And then the guy next to him says, you know, I remember when I was in school and I did something like that. I said, and he tells his story. And then the guy who I insulted tells his story. And the guy next to him tells his story. And the next guy tells his story. And by the time it gets around to me, I'm really clear about what I have to do to make it straight with this guy, which I do. And
so in other words, you can make fun of the Hopis, but you just can't make fun of anybody around the circle.
We'll get to that. That's actually another story. And
I think I've seen those gatherings. Yeah. There are all kinds of
And I got it that nobody, even by body language or tone of voice, was implying that I had sinned. This wasn't about somebody sinned, let's quick call the police.
No, he didn't understand the culture. Is that more it? Right.
Well, no, it was that I had thrown things out of balance.
Right.
And so the job of the culture is not to punish me. The job of the culture is to bring me back into balance.
See, there's something about that I know, like we like the indigenous people. But they have cultures that, are fighting with the Hopis.
Yeah.
They're nutbags too. I don't know a lot of Indians in my day, they could use a little education themselves. You know what I mean? It's like The Godfather. You don't mess with the family, but you kill everybody else. That's another beautiful,
Yeah.
So, it just got to go deeper in all of us.
Yes.
You know what I mean? All of us.
Well, that's where informing those stories about we're all one is so useful. But another one of the important notions is the importance of community and difference, the importance of tribe. What you find is that tribe can be played out in one of 2 ways. It can be, hey, you and I are part of a tribe, and they're all different, and that's a healthy way. Or it can be you and I are part of a tribe, and they're all inferior. And that's a very different story.
Even different. We are all the same at one level. So it's like, oh, you different because you're in, I don't know, my brown or green and I'm in gray. Now, if we take it there, then there's always going to be a difference.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? It's like the differences are so shallow compared to the truth. And that's what we got to get. Actually, we're out of time. We should come back and do another show because I think you got 3 or 4 more to do.
Sure.
So again, we're coming to the end. If you want any information, Alan, 805-687-2053. We love you for coming. Just open your hearts. It's time we did that. We can do it. Good night. God bless you.